We should be, hopefully. Hi, anybody, if you see us, we're working out the kinks here. I'm going to text really quick the girls who are on. Can you see us, Brent? No, he says it doesn't work.
Oh, that's not good.
It says I don't have permission.
Okay, that's all right. Stay there, Laura. All I'm trying to work out is the YouTube part. So you might not see me for a second, but I'm going to be here. I'm just going to minimize.
That's fine.
All right. No. Oh. All right, I'm still working on trying to figure out this link. Wait, all right, hold on.
The link to YouTube?
Yes, hold on, I see a new button here.
You've got the hard end of it.
Oh, goodness. All right, this link looks different. This might work. Hold on. Copy. Okay, I tried sending out another link. So I'm going to see if that works.
The joys of technology.
Yes.
You're a courageous person to take.
Oh my gosh. The whole thing is I'm not. I'm going to try. I'm not sure if people are seeing us or not.
And there's no way to find out, really, right?
Yeah, I tried tweeting it. Let's see. Well, all right, I checked my Twitter feed, Laura, and I saw someone said they can hear me.
Oh, good.
Hopefully they can see us too, but if we're audio, we're audio.
At least audio.
Yay! But you look so beautiful. I hope people can see you. So, welcome everyone. Sorry about the technical little glitch there, but we're here now. I'm Lisa Shepard. I'm here with the language guru who we all love so much, who has written the Bible for us language teachers. This looks backwards. Sorry. The Keys to Planning for Learning. And we are so grateful to have you here. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
And for your patience. Now, while people are discussing us on Twitter, I have some questions prepared here that people have shared. So since the technology took us a little bit of time, we're ready to go. So I kind of tried to start from the beginning as we do when we're planning. So my first question has to do with the themes, and you share with us in Chapter 2 the IB themes, the AP themes, the global language themes. Now, since curriculums usually are 4 or 5 years long, these themes and kind of repeat. So do you have ideas for us about how these themes, how to choose topics so that we have a 4 or 5 year progression of the themes?
So I usually suggest that teachers start with topics. I know that that's sort of not exactly the way we want to think about thematic unit design, but because teachers have traditionally taught topics, if they're thinking about what it is they think their students want to be exposed to at different stages, K, 12 and up, then they can backtrack into the theme. And so the theme serves to narrow the topic. And then what you want to do is see that you pick different themes, not necessarily every theme every year, but a blending, because no theme is pure. So as long as you're not doing contemporary life, contemporary life, contemporary life, you're going to be fine by the end of a progression.
Wonderful. That makes perfect sense. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So also, as we've spoken, and you've given us more information in the second edition about essential questions, and it's still just something that is such a challenge for so many of us. I know myself, I feel like it's too general or it's not general enough, and I really have read everything you've said in the book. Do you have any other suggestions for us?
So I think it's really important that teachers know that McTighe, who actually wrote the Guru of Essential Questions, says that essential questions are a genre of literature. And as such, they are going to need constant revision. So I think the challenge is to write 1 or 2 questions down as you start. Keep working on the unit. Don't expect perfection when you write that first essential question, because as you write the unit, as you find your text, your resources, you're going to shape it it's going to change. It's going to evolve in your brain. And I think we need to just remember a couple of things. No correct answer, and students can answer it in the target language. So you're constantly checking yourself. Do I have a question? It's interesting. It's going to be thought-provoking. They can answer it in the target language and relax a little bit.
Well, that's really helpful. I know that one thing, another issue sometimes personally that I have is working the culture component in. A lot of the examples I've seen for essential questions, for example, in the first unit is, who am I? The culture I just work in later on as I'm planning, since it's not really inherent in the essential question.
So I think that it depends on how narrow of a focus you take of who am I. But if you think of who am I in my own world? Who am I in my community? And who am I in the world? And you start to bring in some of the statistics about, you know, what percentage of the world lives in the United States, or what is my nationality? What is my heritage? Almost any essential question should have culture in it.
Okay.
It would seem simplistic, but one like, who am I? Or what role does food play in our lives? I could take that to mean, what do I eat and where do I go to eat? But if I think about food and where, you know, how does it vary where people live? Or do people have enough food? How does that compare to my community? You know, it's remembering that we are trying to think about those 3 circles that are in the book in every question. And then the culture comes in.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You talked about in your examples of presentational tasks, you gave us an on-demand task and a polished multimedia task, which helped me so much. And I know that's a conversation I've often had with others. Is presentational seems to assume some time and some use of resources, yet sometimes we feel like to have an idea of their proficiency, we need to not let them have all of those resources. So how do you see those 2 types of presentational tasks working?
So it's probably, you know, from my background as a teacher, I worked in a district and was a supervisor in a district where we felt it was very important that students write without resources on a fairly regular basis. So in our minds, once a unit, and that on demand is without resources. But the reason it's still presentational is that you still have time to think and organize your thinking. And just like in first language, if you forget how to spell a word, you might pick a different word so you spell it correctly. And you can organize your thoughts. I think that if we're going to prepare our students well to take AP exams or other types of writing exams, they have to do some on demand. The project is the one thing they probably will never do in the real world unless they really get to a sophisticated level of language. So to me, that one doesn't have to be a component of every unit. It has to be thoughtfully selected because especially at the lower levels, students might do a project, but it might have more attention to what it looks like than the amount of language they have. But that on demand lets me see what can they do with language without resources.
Well, that's great. I think that's a question a lot of people had. Thank you. So a question that a lot of people have is sometimes they're in a district that says you have to use this textbook. So do you have tips for people who have to use the textbook but know that that textbook is not the tool that's going to help their students become more proficient?
I always think it's kind of a misnomer when teachers say they have to use a textbook, when we were all taught that the textbook is not the curriculum. So I think that if a district is really saying they have to use a textbook, the teacher who wants to push some change forward needs to say, okay, I agree. Could we make a list of what our students need to be able to do by the end of the year apart from the textbook? You know, not that it wouldn't look at the textbook, but still in terms of can-do statements, what should they be able to do? So that now the textbook starts to become the resource instead of the day-by-day, I have to do this.
So if the response from the colleagues is they need to be able to conjugate être, conjugate avoir, make adjective agreement, list 10 family members, then what's our next step?
So then I get very cynical and I ask that teacher, and you know, with respect, when have you ever been asked to do that on the streets of Madrid or on the streets of Paris? You're setting bridge goals. You're not playing the game. You're memorizing the rules. So it's like a baseball player who can recite the rules of baseball but can't go out on the field and play it. You're not giving me meaningful real world goals. You're giving me steps to real world. And most people can step back, especially if they watch children learn first language, and realize that conjugating a verb is not how we learn language. So you just have to kind of keep pushing. have you been asked to do this on the streets of? And if the answer is no, you're not at a goal yet. So you don't have to argue about the verb. You just have to say it's not a goal.
It's not a goal. And then a lot of times the follow-up I've heard is, well, what about the college placement exams and the IB test and the AP test? And
so we know that IB and AP have no discrete point grammar or vocabulary any longer. And I would recommend that departments, if they have not, go and get a sample AP exam and take it together as a department for professional development. So that, and that could be done at any level so that they can see what the end goal is, what students really have to be able to do with language. The other thing that I ask is, when should we start worrying about those college placements exams? Because if we don't keep them through senior year, then there's no worry at all because they're probably not taking an exam. So when you have a teacher who's teaching a lower level or middle school saying college placement, that's making a big assumption that they're going to stay with us the entire time. And that's when I ask districts to pull their data and show me what their retention rates are up through level 4 or 5, so we can see how many students we're talking about. So, because if they stick with us, we have plenty of time to not start teaching the grammar, but refine the accuracy of the language, because that comes with time.
Right.
It doesn't come because you memorize a verb in a certain year at a certain time.
Exactly. I know what I've heard you say that made such a difference and that I've shared with other people is you've talked about when you take a group to France or to wherever country, but that it's your C student who's out there talking to everyone and the A student is just huddled in a corner someplace.
That's right. The C students usually surface as the ones who are risk takers, and that's what we need in order to be able to use a language. I shared the other day, my son, whose French is probably rusty, managed to use it when a skier who spoke only French, where he was working, broke her leg in 2 places.
Oh,
I bet you he made a lot of mistakes, but I bet she was really grateful there was a French voice in her ear.
I'm sure she was.
I think we need to remember he had the courage to speak, and some of our straight A students would say, well, I might make a mistake. And
Right.
we create that when we start focusing on accuracy too quickly.
I so much agree. Thank you.
If anybody sees me making strange gestures, it's because my cat is about to appear in the screen.
Well, I'll be happy to see your cat too.
Rubbing his whiskers on the laptop. When I changed rooms, he now has access.
One person asked a question that I thought was interesting was with a lot of the terminology as people start talking about different methods of assessment, there seems to be some confusion. My understanding of an IPA is that it's an assessment. And some people, there seems to be confusion about, is it an assessment or is it a whole unit? Do you want to speak to a little bit just about terminology?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that happened is because the IPA manual came out and then Paul Sandrock did the keys on assessment, is that section of a unit got pulled out as if it could stand alone. But when you think about backward design, stage 1 is setting your goals, and stage 2 is making sure you know how you're going to assess those goals. So the IPA is actually stage 2 of backward design, and as such is part of a unit of instruction. So you've got stage 1, set your unit goals, stage 2, IPA, figure out how you're going to assess them, and then stage 3, what activities, what learning experiences are you going to create to get them there?
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. The questions is, I'm going to read it exactly not to mess it up, but in the absence of a test, how might teachers demonstrate to stakeholders that their students are progressing as they learn through the thematic units?
So we tried to beef up that section in chapter 5 of the second edition because we got so many questions. But I think it's really important to remember that we've never actually had great evidence, even in a textbook series, that they were acquiring what was taught in previous years. I know from experience, I taught French, and I taught all 5 levels for a while. And I was still teaching the present tense in levels 3, 4, and 5. So what guarantee did I have that what I had done had worked? But there are ways of tracking to make sure that the key functions come up over and over and over again. And just because we teach a skill, that constant repetition and practice actually gives us a better chance of having students be able to do something. Let me give you a specific example that I often share, like asking questions. In a traditional textbook, that was 1 chapter in a level 1 textbook. And they learned every question, who, what, when, where, why. And then you ask yourself, where did they keep coming back deliberately? And they didn't. And so students were weak in questioning. Well, the thematic unit puts questioning into almost every unit is going to be ask and answer questions at increasingly more progressive ways. So I think the odds are in your favor, and it's almost like a fear that's not really materialized yet, but we should just relax because it didn't work before.
I think that's really important to remember that. That has gotten me out of some difficult conversations too. It didn't always work. So
well, and people who think it is working, who are very tied to a textbook, the evidence of success is the number of students in your upper level classes. So if we're still having our tremendous drop off at 2 or 3 or whatever our state seems to cause, then we're not going to create future generations of students who have the languages. We've got to get the numbers up in our upper level classes. So when we're looking for measures of success, yes, progress towards proficiency is certainly a measure of success, but just staying with it for longer is a measure of success. So I think we have to rethink our goals a bit.
I couldn't agree more. I know personally with my students, as it stopped being about accuracy and memorizing a certain number of verbs and spellings that didn't make sense, the students did have more confidence, and it's that confidence that kept them in the class. So I think that's so important. Thank you. One question, getting back to the topic of essential questions. Someone asked about how do we assess those? You've mentioned that it should be able to be answered in the language, but is there ever a time that we actually assess the student specifically on the essential question?
So I would say that the IPA, the assessments for the unit, have to factor in the essential question. So if your essential question was, who am I? And you had looked at it through the lens of self and community in the world, then you might ask them to say, who are you in relation to others? So that they're thinking through that essential question. Or if it's a simple one like food, what do you eat here? But how would it be different if you spent 3 days in France? So that the essential question, the way you give your prompt, brings in an element of the essential question. You shouldn't feel like it has to be a separate thing.
Okay.
And you don't have to assess everything in every mode. So sometimes the essential question could be assessed better through the interpretive and a cultural comparison piece. Sometimes it could be better assessed through the presentation on demand, sometimes through a project. So it wouldn't have to be as strong in every one. But as you design the task, you're always trying to think, how does this address the essential question in some way?
Great, thank you. So that kind of leads us to the next question, which was, how should a teacher decide which goals to assess in the summative, interpersonal, and presentational task? I want to avoid a laundry list type assessment, but also get a full picture.
Okay, so I think you do want to step back and you want to think about real world communication. So while we probably will cover things in a unit, we shouldn't try to assess all of them in every mode. We should be thoughtful about which mode they would use them in the real world, and then try to make sure that we incorporate it in that mode. So sure, let me give you a couple of just real simple ones. Commands. Okay. We've always been hung up on commands, but really commands for a non-native speaker of a language would probably only be used, or should only be used, through the interpretive mode. I should understand what I'm being told to do or asked to do. But if I'm 14, 15 years old, it's not going to be logical for me to tell a native speaker what to do. So I won't do it in the interpersonal. And we only write commands when we write dialogue usually. And our lower level speakers aren't ready to write dialogue in any real world way. So we need to make sure that we don't get hung up on, oh, I've worked on a packing list for a trip and I've got to get it into my on-demand task, when you and I aren't going to talk much about what we're going to pack. It might be, are you taking a dressy outfit? Yes. Okay. We're finished. We're not going to say, yes, I'm packing a suit and a tie and dress. No, we talk about, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? So we want to assess the big goals of the unit. We'll do other things in class, but we don't have to assess everything.
That's helpful. Thank you. So, what are some of, as districts start this work and use the book to guide their changes to their curriculum, what are the biggest pitfalls that you think that that we're going to fall into as we do this work?
Well, since most teachers are type A perfectionists, it's going to be really hard to recognize that it will not be perfect. This is a lot of work, but I always ask teachers who've been through textbook adoptions to remember that the first year of a new textbook was touch and go. The second year was better. By the third year, it was feeling pretty good. And by the fourth year, you were starting to think this book wasn't very good and you were looking forward to the next adoption. So those of us that have experience can kind of think, well, it's never been easy. And so but this work, once you get it right, it can stay in place for a long time. I think that there are some districts that think that this can be done overnight. And if the district isn't going to support you with time, money, it's going to take a long time. So you want to make incremental changes then. You want to decide, what are my units? Focus your efforts. Get rid of things that aren't working. Find an entry point. Maybe you want a thematic vocabulary list for the unit you're teaching right now. And that's a good starting point. Maybe you want to add an interpersonal assessment, and that's all you can do this year. Great starting point. So you don't have to aim for perfection.
That's so encouraging.
Any baby steps towards real world is a good thing.
Oh, that's great. I know another concern that teachers have as they're starting this work is, as you were saying, the time, especially when it comes to finding those authentic resources. Do you have any tips for people who are kind of worried about that?
Yes. Be a friend of Pinterest. I think that as you do it, it gets easier. I mean, Lisa, you're a master at this. Initially, you don't know how to search, but then the more you do it, the easier it gets. So a couple of my favorite tips are search in the target language. Mm-hmm. So just bring up your browser and come up with phrases of things that you think you're looking for. So for example, the other day, some of you may have seen the dog sledding that went viral. Well, I decided I wanted the article in French and in Spanish about that dog. So then I'm just Googling in French and Spanish, the dog that sleds by himself, the dog that, and then I finally for Spanish put in viral video, dog sledding, and boom, we had it. So it's just kind of playing with language. Then click on images and video. Don't look in that browser for all the text, because behind every image is the target language. So you might see a cute image that you think this looks age appropriate. When you click, there's the article you need. I'm a big fan of Huffington Post because of the editions. Huffington Post is published in Spain and in Mexico, in France, Canada, Italy. And so it's written at the middle school level. For current events, you can find articles that are going to be age appropriate. Newsella, Tween Tribune for the Lexiles in Spanish.
Okay.
It's not hard. It's just, and then I just tell myself it's your best way of keeping your own language current. Because you're always finding things to read. And the reason it's so hard is not because it's so hard. It's because we find interesting things and we start reading them. And then we're like, oh, wait, this won't work for my students. But now, it's great.
But it's fun.
Yeah,
that's great. You have been so generous with your examples in the book. Are there other places that you suggest people look for other units that if they feel like they don't have time to make their own? Are there other places
they should go to your site?
Oh,
I always tell them for French to go to your site. I think also you Google thematic unit on and you do it in your target language. If you haven't found people to follow, and if there's someone that knows good Spanish ones, I'd love to know them. I think you just have to look. But the other thing, sometimes I cheat. And when I'm working on a new unit with a teacher, I'll Google in English, thematic unit on, and I might find the science teachers that's done this in English for the 3rd or 4th grade student. And all of a sudden, I don't have it in the target language, but I have ideas. I'm not starting from scratch. I do the same thing with essential questions sometimes. Essential questions on and see what pops up, because sometimes it'll just get me thinking about what's out there. Ideally, we have a repository of all these units, but I know teachers say, who could publish a book on this? The problem is I think you have to do some of the work yourself to understand how the unit goes together. Just like when you got that brand new textbook, it took you 2 to 3 years to figure it out. If somebody just hands you a unit, it's not going to be yours. And so you're going to have this doesn't work because you didn't design it.
I know even mine don't feel right the next year. There's always a way to make it better, or you find something new, or in the world something new happens and you want to incorporate some kind of current events, or it's changing.
But that's the beauty of thematic teaching. It lets you be responsive to your students and to changing events in a way that a textbook never let you feel as responsive.
Right. But then you didn't have that same engagement when it wasn't yours. It's so much more fun to teach with thematic units because you pick what you're passionate about used to start with.
I mean, I have teachers who hate me because I come in and suggest this, but then I also have teachers who will come up and say, you saved my career. I mean, I was getting so bored, but now I'm finding passion again. And I think people should think about that. There's a real joy in being able to craft what you want to do, especially if you can work with your colleagues or other colleagues in other districts who share that same kind of passion.
Sure. The other question, backtracking a little bit, but there is a question here about culture and assessing culture. I know that's one of the issues that I have sometimes is like for the interpersonal, to bring in the cultural component. If I'm having the students just talk about their life, what do you like to eat or what do you like to do for fun, then they're not bringing in the culture. So sometimes I'll pretend like you're a French person and talk about this, but then they're not expressing their own identity. So do you have any advice for me about that?
I think the interpersonal is the hardest one to bring it in on, just because in the lower levels, it's hard to think beyond yourself, especially in that moment. But I think there's nothing wrong with role play. And I also think you can ask them to do things like you said, talk about what you want to do, and then talk about how you are similar to or different from the French or the Spanish or whatever you've brought in as that comparison point. So they might be saying, on the weekends, I really love to, but in France, I would probably do this. And you would have planted that. Not somebody will be saying, well, that's a conditional in level 1, but you would have put on that thematic vocabulary list. In France, I would probably, and how to complete it so that they could just do it with an infinitive or a construction that would be easy. And just to me, that takes care of that rubric line in the ACTFL domains that says cultural awareness. And so they're just starting to think. So I don't think it has to be a dissertation, a paragraph about culture in that interpersonal mode, but just that they can bring it in. Or when I go to France, I really want to try blah, 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 because, I love this food here, but in France, I really want to try, oh, okay, you learned about bouillabaisse, and now you brought it in. Great. You get those points. You're starting to think in those 3 dimensions of self, community, and world.
Got you. That's really helpful. That's most of the questions that I have. I'm trying to kind of peek here if I have so many other things coming on Twitter. It's a little bit hard to look at both.
Take a minute and look.
What are some other, are there other questions or things that you can think of to talk to us about that we haven't thought of asking?
So you had one on your list that comes up a lot, and it's about when assessment should occur. And so if a thematic unit is going to last 6 or 9 weeks, and now you're not going to be grading as much. Most teachers do have a need to put grades in the grade book. And so the interpretive assessments, because that's your input piece, are probably front loading what you hope that they can produce in the other modes. So it would be logical that interpretive could come in at week 2, week 3, week 4, and be interspersed more towards that midpoint, be finished maybe 2/3 of the way. Then the presentational might come in near the end, with the interpersonal being last. And then for teachers who have this requirement that they get so many grades in the grade book, you might do a sample writing, but only grade 1 line of the rubric in week 3, and maybe grade another line of a rubric in week 4, and then do a full-blown rubric grading at the end, just to keep it manageable so that they're getting some feedback along the way. That tends to be a question that gets asked a lot.
Okay, that's good. Going back, I have a little note here. Hi, Catherine. A little Facebook came through, but she did remind me that for the French teachers out there, AATF has wonderful resources that are already curated for us. They have a Pinterest page, they have a wiki, so there really are lots of lots of curated resources.
Right now, it's easier to find French than any other language, but that's my language. So I always say, well, maybe that's just because it's the language I taught. But French teachers in the US, and then I really recommend that teachers try to find that middle school newspaper. Like in French, we have the Un Jour, Un Actu.
Right.
What is that equivalent? Because that is a resource for authentic text with video and debates and current events and silly articles. Children, middle school reporters interviewing people for audio clips. If we can find that magazine in every language, that can be a really rich resource.
Sure, that's great advice. Thank you. Other things that people ask you a lot?
Yes, they ask a lot about grammar.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important, and I like Bill Van Patten's book that just got produced through ACTFL. He does a really good like a review of linguistics, and he talks a lot about universal grammar and explicit grammar. The syllabus that we inherited from our textbooks was not a research-based syllabus. And so what it did was it implied that this was the right sequence for teaching grammar without any research to build it on. And so what I really want teachers to do is to think more about what we know from research students can do. Look at that proficiency piece that says, well, by the time they get to intermediate mid, They're only supposed to be able to do a paragraph, a good paragraph, topic sentence, concluding sentence, connecting ideas between the two in one time frame. Intermediate mid gets you a 3 on an AP. If that's the requirement for intermediate mid to get a 3 on the AP, now we'll build from there. But then wasn't it pretty unreasonable to think that we could put all of it in level 2 through the subjunctive, and then we get into the past conditional and conditional? And I mean, it doesn't make sense. I'm not saying to avoid those. And the other thing is to stop avoiding grammar in lower levels. When you use authentic text, students will be exposed to the conditional and the subjunctive and direct object pronouns. They'll be exposed in context. And so it lets them start to acquire the language the way a native acquires it. Many Spanish speakers would never be able to explain what's the difference between ser and a star. That's sure. The difference of what's the difference between il and c'est in French. A French speaker probably won't have a ready answer. They'll just say, I don't know, it sounds right.
Like we do in English, right?
We need to let our students have more of those authentic exposures to language. So they build that ear of, I don't know, it sounds right. And we need to remember that it's not a mistake unless meaning is lost. So if they communicate, it might bring a smile to your face the way they do it. Just like when a 3-year-old talks to you in English, it sometimes brings a smile to a grandparent's face. It's like, oh, that's so cute. It's so wrong, but it's so cute. But we understood it, and that's not an error. And somehow we've got to get into our beginning level classes and say, it's okay to make mistakes. It's a part of acquisition. And relax a little bit about this. Oh no, they'll make mistakes. I don't know.
That's great. Awesome. So what's your next project? Now that the book is out.
The book's out? Yes. What was your question?
Yeah. So what's your next project? What do we have to look forward from you next?
I think maybe I'll just relax for a little bit.
I think you've earned it.
I think that's what I'm really thinking would be a great idea.
Yes, well, you've earned it. Well, we have just a few minutes left, but I'm sure the Twitter conversation is going to continue. But thank you so much for being with us tonight. I really appreciate it.
All right.
So much to all of us. We all have learned so much from you and from reading the book.
Well, my pleasure. And if anybody does have a follow-up comment, I'm not a big fan. I don't do a lot of Twitter. I'm old. But you can always email me at lterrill@gmail.com. So I try to answer if I get questions. So okay.
That's very generous. Thank you so much.
You took on a big technology challenge. Kudos to you.
Well, and to you too, but we did it.
We did. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.